So in the month-long break from uploading, I've been diversifying the type of media I consume because I recently realized that I actually don't know much about stuff outside of Danganronpa or Pokemon. During this time, I've been watching anime and studying for my exams. But one of the anime I watched stood out from the rest, and that anime was Cyberpunk Edgerunners. Now, at first, this wasn't an anime I cared too much about, as the game didn't really attract me, so I watched through the 10 episodes in a few days, and it has been an emotional roller coaster to say the least. This anime went from typical shonen type beat to some of the most harrowing shit I've seen in the span of a few episodes, and that's exactly what I want to talk about. How Edgerunners snaps you back to reality by using pre-established anime tropes and flipping them over, only to throw these horrible gut punches right below the belt. Now this video is going to be separated into 3 different parts. The first one where I just introduce the anime and its beginning, then the next part where I talk about the complete derailment the story goes through. Not in a bad way, it's a derailment, but it also works. And the third part, which is about David and Lucy's relationship. So, yeah, hopefully you enjoy. I just want to say that before going through this video, you should definitely watch the anime. This is probably the only time I'll shill an anime, but it is just that good. I know it has some, shortcomings, but counterpoint, it's really good. So, yes, please come back after you've seen the anime. There will be spoilers for just, the entire plot, and I think that's everything, so let's get on with the video. The anime follows David Martinez, a high schooler living in Night City, the place where the Cyberpunk 2077 game takes place, immediately connecting the two pieces of media together. David has never met his father, and has a mother working as a paramedic, often coming home exhausted from long night shifts. Due to these living conditions, David has learned to live by himself, and he uses black market technology to get around paying for much more expensive technology, and has the reputation of an outcast at his high school, the Arasaka Academy. This leads to him getting bullied by richer kids who don't believe he belongs in such a prestigious education system. This immediately makes him the prime shonen protagonist material. He's an outcast who faces hardships regularly from not being able to afford a nice home or school supplies, having very limited time with his family due to irregular schedules of paramedics, and he's looked down on by his classmates, the Ripper Doc, and society in general, as he is born in unfortunate circumstances. And if that wasn't enough to make a decent protagonist, his mother dies, right after a dramatic speech, and the fire inside David that motivates him to take down massive futuristic corporation just goes insane, as he sees his mother could have been saved if she had the Night City Gold Battle Pass enabled. Filled with rage to take down the rich, corrupted assholes of this world, David installs a Sandevistan onto him, a hyper-powerful military-grade weapon that allows him to speed up at the speed of sound, and cause a man to go insane in the first scenes of the series. So with this first episode, we establish the protagonist through a pretty regular storyline. A hero faces hardships in daily life, making him a sympathetic underdog that we all want to cheer for and see succeed in life. This underdog then has a catalyst moment that forces him to stand up for himself, and while he initially refuses to equip the Sandevistan, constant mockery from his classmates following his mother's death pushes him over the edge. He's now the most powerful student at the school and kicks the bully's ass, which gets him expelled. Slightly lost and confused, he then meets Lucy, a girl who seems to have been appearing a few times earlier in the previous episodes, and it's love at first sight as she tries to steal his shards. As he manages to defend himself and now owns such a good implant, they immediately form a partnership where they both steal shards from corporate slaves only to sell them later for Eurodollars. After some wacky hijinks, the two of them go to an apartment where we learn about Lucy's dream in an ethereal sequence on the moon accompanied by Rosa Walton's song, "I Really Want to Stay at Your House." This scene really comes out of nowhere, as so far all we've seen from this show is tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. But for once, things are finally looking up as these star-crossed lovers are sharing a beautiful moment, until eventually,
you fell over the edge, punk.
David is then ambushed by a gang who threaten him as he has a stolen Sandevistan, which was meant to go to Maine, the leader of this gang, as it turns out that his mother was also a black market vendor, which explains how David was able to go to the academy despite his mother having such a seemingly low salary. Conflicted about all of this, David does the one thing we should all do when we're in a life or death situation: flex your tolerance for cyberware. After learning how special and different David is, they accept to let him go into the gang if he can pull off a single heist. The heist doesn't really go as planned, but he still enters the group, and now this becomes fast and furious as David has a found family with Maine and the others. Now, these first few episodes are very typical as they all follow the hero's journey circle relatively well. David lives ordinarily, passing through bloody streets and burning buildings in the opening scenes of the anime, has a call to adventure after catching a glimpse of Lucy in the first episode, gets bullies, loses his mother, and acquires a Sendevistan. He refuses this initial call to adventure as he wants to sell the Sendevistan instead of equipping it. When he does get initial revenge on his bullies, he meets Lucy, who serves as a mentor and crosses a first threshold with her on his first job. As he meets his allies, we get a general idea of who the enemies are, but instead of learning it through more exposition or backstory, etc., we get it in the worst possible way. David is now a part of a found family, a la Fast and Furious, and we have the perfect shot to solidify that fact. All we're missing is some bass-boosted music, and it's part of the FF franchise. After all the action that was previously shown, it's nice to end an episode on a more chill high note. And then, in a pretty comedic way, this cool sequence is cut short by urination because didn't we already see how awful this city is in previous episodes? Pilar, being the lanky comic relief that he is, decides to criticize the man for having a robotic schlong, but in such a sudden manner, he gets pwned. This is probably one of the most important scenes in the show, and it's so weird because it all happens so fast. It's so fast, in fact, that the anime shows the death 3 times in rapid succession from different angles. And even after seeing it happen too many times, the viewer is still flabbergasted, much like David, who at this point just remains frozen in place. The focus on David's facial expression during this scene is a detail I love so much, because at this point the audience still feels somewhat connected to David. They're still learning about the world of cyberpunks and aren't expecting any tragedy for the time being. From pretty much every other media, the cool walking in group scene would have signified the end of the story, or at least episode. David, just as much as the audience, felt a sense of safety. They could feel the warmth of being accepted into a new family, and truly thought they'd be safe from further harm for the time being. This is evident when you look at David's face prior to Pilar's death. He's smiling. After all the shit he's been through, he still manages to find happiness with his new family. So for all that to be taken away just like that is ballsy, to say the least. Pilar, like most characters in the series, isn't one that got a lot of development, so I guess you could say that it was less impactful as there wasn't much time for the viewers to get attached to him. However, if you've seen at least another anime, you could probably get what Pilar could have eventually become. He's a comic relief character. He goes against every other character attitude-wise. Instead of being more gritty or serious, he's more carefree and sleazy. And he could have potentially had an interesting past or a turning point giving him more importance or more character. Another character that fits into the quote-unquote archetype that Pilar is a part of is Narancia from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 5. Sure, he's immature and doesn't show much development early on in the plot, but that reaches a turning point during the fight with Squalo and Tiziano. We also learn that during his fight with Formaggio that there are reasons as to why he behaves this way. While he starts off and remains a comic relief for the series, he still manages to find development and manages to grow out of that role of being just a joke character. These kinds of characters can be very hit or miss though, but killing off a character this early on just hurts more as you're left with what could have been from either a dramatic turning point later on during the plot or exposition on his past, as he dies very early on and we only know 3 things about him. 1, he's Rebecca's brother. 2, he's basically Sanji of the group. And 3, long arms. So far, this scene hurts for 2 reasons, as it kills off a character that didn't have time to grow, and it also breaks the viewer's trust by killing off a character right after a moment where the main characters are supposed to be safe. This scene is not only important as it shows that plot armor doesn't exist in this world, but it also becomes something of a turning point for the series. From this point onwards, everything feels faster. The innocent David we knew from the first 3 episodes is gone, and now he's on his way to becoming an Edgerunner legend, as he takes someone else's life. At this point, the connection between the viewer and David starts to feel a little bit weaker as more time is skipped between episodes and David crumbs himself up even more. This all becomes much more evident after the events of episode 6, in which 2 more members of the gang die. And while Main's death also did hurt, as he was David's father figure, and his demise traumatized David, leading him down a path of excessive chroming, I don't think it subverted anyone's expectations and threw a gut punch under the belt like for Pilar. Something I haven't mentioned to this point is the concept of cyberpsychosis, a side effect of chroming yourself up too much, which basically turns you into a cold killing machine. Your sanity snaps and the chrome has taken control over your body as it was too much for you to handle. In a place like Night City, where cyberpunks chrome themselves up constantly with new technology for more security, they live on the edge of cyberpsychosis, being one traumatic event away from going sicko mode. This whole edging cyberpsychosis thing is the reason why they're called Edgerunners, probably. This affects everyone who has an implant, from Pilar's killer to Maine, and with not so subtle build-up, cyberpsychosis climaxes visually at least, with rapidly twitching eyes. Now, to prevent cyberpsychosis, you could use meds, just not chrome yourself up, or in some very specific cases, maybe you don't need any of that. Maybe you're special and can withstand this technology as you inherited perfect genes. And that's exactly what we think David is like, or so we think. So Maine and Dory are dead, David is traumatized, his love life is falling apart, and as time goes on, he is beginning to lose his humanity, disconnecting even more from the audience, as David is no longer the naive little boy anymore. He still cares about others, he's just unfazed by death now. He can kill with more ease, even if he still freezes in certain instances. This part of the show is filled to the brim with action sequences, as that's all that David's life is. Sure, he lives with Lucy in a penthouse apartment now, but she's often absent, so he tries to distract himself with new jobs, new gear, new body parts. You can see now that when he gets more chrome, he's in less agony than when he got his first Sandevistan. He's beginning to be more robot than actual organic. This is probably David at one of his lowest points. He's been through so much, and the audience hasn't had time to properly process it, as, well, it all happened too fast. This show won't really let you think, as it just bombards you with action upon action upon action. And I believe that that's exactly the point. It's trying to distract you from the bigger issues here, like David's, well, pseudo-depression. This anime might be marketed as a, bombastic shonen story, but it also has some slower, darker parts that aren't really brought to the limelight because they're overshadowed by all the fights, all the blood, all the gore. Hell, just look at the opening. It's This Fire by Franz Ferdinand, an upbeat song talking about how he has this fire that motivates him to do unspeakable things. And it's filled with bright colors and just, it's supposed to get you pumped. You're not going to expect to see David go through some major traumatic events. You're here to see him beat everyone in Night City and become the greatest cyberpunk. So when scenes like this exist, you don't expect it, and you end up feeling, I guess, a little more awful. A few jobs later, and the gang get betrayed by Kiwi and Faraday, who are planning to kill the remaining main characters as they have powerful technology. And this instant, while being manipulated by the higher-ups, David gets in the cyberskeleton and gets his final upgrade. Nobody important died here, but in my opinion, this is one of the most painful scenes to watch in the show, as David completely goes over the edge, and when he gets his upgrade, he now needs hard meds to combat cyberpsychosis, and the only organic parts left on him are his head and torso, and even then, who knows what's left of the David we met in episode 1. I know he's probably already been going in and out of cyberpsychosis as he has committed multiple gruesome murders without realizing it, but the point I want to make with this evidence has to come later. Sure, he's powerful now, but at what cost? He's abandoned his old body, and no matter what he says, he's still a pawn for the corporations. During the entire time, his personal growth, his special aptitudes, and resistances to cyberware were all planned to be used for new experimental technology. This is the only scene in the show that radiates despair. Even if the content itself isn't too bad, the viewer realizes that this is it. His fate is sealed, and he'll be killed like the guy who went cyber psycho in the first episode. This then makes a never-ending circle of corporate advancements created on piles and piles of bodies of formerly innocent humans. It's at this point that everyone realizes, both in the show and outside the show, that David is going to die here. Everything he's done was for nothing. He's still just the corporate slave that his mother wanted him to be in the first episode. No matter what an Edgerunner does, they're still going to be a part of the cogs that turn in the name of large corporations. This is all made even worse when you look at the hero's journey circle and realize that we haven't even seen the ordeal yet, as Lucy is still being held hostage by Faraday. The final episode follows the 3 remaining members of the gang trying to retrieve Lucy, with David tempting the devil as he's basically gone insane. Kiwi gets betrayed and killed, but at this point it doesn't sting as much because most of the attention is on the main couple and Rebecca. Also, it really just shows how much corpos are soulless bastards who deserve no mercy. Skip forward even more, and David is met face to face with Atom Smasher, a full cyborg who can't go cyberpsychosis. He's the boogeyman of Night City. During this initial meeting, David puts his balls on the table and asserts dominance through a little bit of banter. However, a shortage of medication paired with traumatic memories pushes him over the edge. He makes an escape with Lucy, only to be brought back through a kiss with his pixie girl girlfriend. The two then meet up with Rebecca and Falco, who have been holding up pretty well, all things considered, and have a cute reunion, only for all of it to go wrong a few seconds later. In a similar fashion to her brother, Rebecca has a death so nice you have to see it thrice. Once again, as all hope is found, the anime takes it all away as another death takes place during a moment of supposed peace. Yes, I know a shootout is still going on, but the way the two characters talk to each other doesn't scream,
"We're all gonna fucking die with lead in our skull," or whatever bullets are made out of in the future.
Now, depending on who you are, you could perceive this death as bittersweet or plainly sad. Bittersweet as while yes, Rebecca, the person that the audience has bonded the most with after Main's death, has just died, it was a quick death and she went out in a blaze of glory, defending the only people she cared about, creating even more respect or recognition for her in the end. And if you think it was just sad, well, fair enough, she was probably the fan favorite character, and for her to die in such a sudden manner really hurts, I think. So Rebecca is now dead, and the audience once again suffers from another gut punch, as they were having a moment. If that wasn't enough, David gets completely dismantled by Atom Smasher, and all that remains of the cyberskeleton is broken garbage. It's at this point that we realize that maybe David wasn't special after all. No matter what his mother told him at the beginning of the story, maybe David wasn't destined to succeed in life. He isn't immune to cyberpsychosis, we've seen it multiple times as he committed murders without controlling his body, he was barely brought back by Lucy's kiss, and if this went on a bit longer, he would have probably had cyberpsychosis. Sure, he may have some tolerance for cyberware and knows his way with words, but in the end he wasn't any different from any other guy who was played by Arasaka before him. He couldn't beat Atom Smasher, who, need I remind you, is one of the weakest characters in the game, and because he's not the special one, he dies. With his death comes the final blow from the show, which reminds you that David was never special. The real protagonist in the Cyberpunk universe is V, and everything that David has done led to nothing, which is then seen in the reward part of the hero's journey, in which Lucy finally gets what she wanted, to be on the moon, a promise that David kept and now rings hollow as Lucy lost the one she truly cared about. And it's on this bittersweet note that we say goodbye to the tale of Cyberpunk Edgerunners, a series that takes pre-established tropes in media and changes them to provoke an even stronger reaction in the viewer. Edgerunners is probably going to be remembered for a few things. The killing of everyone's favorite cyberpunk Rebecca, stellar action sequences, but most importantly, ruining everyone's Spotify playlist with the song I Really Wanna Stay at Your House. As previously mentioned, a scene taking place in Lucy's apartment in the second episode shows a different side to the cold pixie girl, as the main couple take a trip to the moon and even hold hands. Now this is the climax in a series of events, as previously the two had escaped from an ambulance where a paramedic tried to take David's sanity, forcing the two to disobey multiple traffic laws in a colorful, fast-paced, Fast and Furious-like sequence. While David is on the verge of fucking dying, instead of panicking, he just stares up at his soon-to-be girlfriend in awe. He's incredibly down bad, and all of this build-up to a confession ends up with him vomiting on himself, probably even at himself too. Now, David and Lucy are by no means a perfect couple. They're probably a prime example of the things that will lead to cheating in a relationship. But while all of this is going on, the anime manages to emotionally kill the audience, then piss on their corpse with sequences that the audience has either experienced to an extent, or has dreamed of experiencing. A scene that comes to mind is when David first enters her apartment and drinks for probably the first time in his life. At this point, he's just a kid who's never really done anything wrong. Sure, he may be scrappy, but he definitely hasn't killed anyone yet. This whole scene just screams inexperienced adolescent romance, as he has no idea how to go about expressing his feelings towards her. He likes her but wants to play cool, as she has a deadpan expression most of the time. Eventually, the mask slips off, and he gets teased for being such a child. And at this point, it's pretty normal, as David is so young and inexperienced. The conversation then becomes one about dreams, and this is where we get the previously mentioned moon sequence, where David learns more about Lucy, and even if, it was stalling for Maine to come, she really did want to go to the moon and was opening herself up to David. Now, I don't know who I speak for here, but I'm pretty sure that everyone has had at least one bizarre dream or thought about going someplace with their crush, and it's only natural. David at this point is still, somewhat connected to the audience, and we can see that the most here with David being so visibly ecstatic. He's been through so much hardships, and for once in his life, things are finally looking up. So for all of it to be taken away when Maine enters the room is just terrible, because it takes you back to reality, and you don't really want to go back there at this point. Another important scene for them is one in episode 4, where they share a kiss on a rooftop after Lucy basically admits that she doesn't want David to have a life as an Edgerunner, as most of the time they make a name for themselves after their death. After these clear warnings, David responds with the most normal answer anyone down bad would give and promises to take Lucy to the moon before exchanging a kiss in such a dramatic fashion. The rocket flying off in the background could also be symbolism for how their relationship is taking off at this point, because that's exactly what's going on. Keep in mind that this scene takes place almost immediately after Pilar's death, which really just gives the viewer emotional whiplash as they don't know how they should feel anymore while watching this show. This scene is also somewhat called back to in the final fight, as they share a kiss to save David from going sicko mode, giving the audience hope as David has been reborn through the power of love. The relationship between these two characters is very rocky, to say the least. Most of the time, an interaction with the two will end up in a disagreement or a fight or anything like that, and you only get very few moments where you actually, see the love between these two characters. Explicitly, at least, because they love each other, they just don't know how to express it properly. A lot of relationships in shonen media only focus on the positives, and only show negatives if the plot requires it. And that's what I love about this relationship. It feels more realistic than most others portrayed in anime. If you are or have been in a relationship, you know that you're not always going to get along. And that's exactly what's shown here, and that's something that's omitted from a lot of other shows. Lucy is a child soldier, and this leads to her having some trust issues, which is why she can't really express herself properly to David. The showrunners are well aware of that fact. Lucy is always absent because she's trying to defend David's identity by killing off different hackers. Because she can't really talk about it to David, this leads to them being more distant from each other and eventually breaking up. Lucy is a human being. She's imperfect. She can't really tell everything that's going on to David because that's against her character. And I love that the showrunners didn't make her a plot device who would just talk about everything, reveal everything, let David win in the end, because it would just derail her character. Lucy isn't the only one to blame though, as David is also beginning to lose his humanity at this point. He's chromed up, killing more people, on the verge of cyberpsychosis, and I think the showrunners did a fantastic job of highlighting not only the positives of relationships, but also the low points. When the moon sequence takes place in episode 2, you don't expect the morale of the characters to drop this quickly. And so, for the most part, you just expect all hope to be lost. I mean, you see David put on the cyber skeleton, and you know that his fate is sealed. He might meet up with Lucy once again, but it might be the last time. And just when the viewer is losing hope once again, as David falls into cyberpsychosis, Lucy dives in for one more kiss, and it's magical. David comes back to his senses, and the two confess their love to each other. They know that this might be their last moment together, so they talk about everything, and the audience feels hope. In this callback to the first kissing scene paired with the music from the moon sequence, the audience knows that this is their moment to shine. This is when David finally impresses Lucy, and the two of them eventually go to the moon after this fight. This is one last hurdle, and for all of it to go wrong again just hurts even more. As Lucy escapes with Falco and David is, pretty much dead, the audience starts to think about all their moments together. What if the two of them had communicated earlier? Would this have ended differently? And as the camera moves away from the Earth and onto the moon, we get the final scenes of the show. Lucy has finally made it to the moon. David kept his promise, however, Lucy isn't satisfied with this. She realizes that she wanted to be there, but with David. As over the span of 10 episodes, she realized that he was the one. As Johnny Silverhand once said on the topic of good endings,
Here, for folks like us, wrong city, wrong people.
and that's how it ends. A fulfilled promise that now rings hollow. that was a fun video to make. Hopefully my points got across. Yeah. If you haven't seen the show yet, I still don't know what you're doing here. Just go watch it. You should. It's probably my favorite anime to come out of 2022. It's just that good. I don't really know when the next video is going to come out, but yeah. I think that's all of it. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more life-changing content, and goodbye.